Boom! Hey everyone, Oliver here from Caipora Studio. Today I'm going to be running through the drum mix I did for Overdrive Luna on this song Dying in the Sun. This was actually a really cool project. So Overdrive Luna is a band from Brazil and they partnered with another Brazilian singer called IVor. And what they did is they grabbed each other's songs and then covered each other. So if you go on your streaming platforms and look for Overdrive Luna, you're going to see that there's an EP there with 3 songs. Road Home, Dying in the Sun, which is a song I mixed, and then Igor's version of Road Home. So check them out, and today I'll be showing you how I mix the drums. Now, to start off, I completely turned off everything on my master chain and everything on my 2-bus except for a little trimmer, which I just upped the volume a bit so you can hear the song a bit better. And let's take a deep dive into how I approach the drum. So, as most rock and metal music producers and sound engineers and mixing engineers, we tend to start off with the drums as the foundation of the song. And then throughout the rest of the mixing, we kind of work around the drums and then tailor the drums according to what everything else is happening. But because the drums have very specific places where they stay, with the kick in the kind of 100 hertz, the snare in around the 200 hertz, we kind of have specific places where they stay. It's a kind of a nice place to start off. So I'll show you what I first did with the shells. I'm going to switch off everything on my parallel compression, and I'll look into that a bit later. Now, my routing is kind of very simple. You'll see here that I work with folders. So everything, all the tracks for my kicks go into a kick folder. Then same thing with the snare and toms. And then these folders go into the shells folder. And this is alongside my overheads folder, which include my overhead, hi-hat, and ride. And then alongside the shells and overheads, I've got the room track. And here is my parallel compressor for drums. So one thing you might notice is that all my ambient plugins of reverb, delays, and choruses, I never actually add them straight onto the tracks. I only work with them as sends. So I'll just quickly show you what I have here in my sends before we dive into the drums. When I start mixing, I have all the sends kind of activated. And then throughout the mixing, I start throwing them away, bringing them back. But all my tracks start with all my 8 different sends activated on the track. And what do they actually do? So the first one, we have a deverb, which I use as a kind of medium reverb, around 4 to 500 milliseconds. No pre-delay. This is the settings that I like. And then my second effect is a digital reverb, the famous LX480. This is the Essentials version, which is more than enough for me, so I tend to use it as the whole setting. Hardly any decay. There's not much low filters, a bit of high filters, and as any sends with 100% mix. Third reverb I use, this is a long reverb, the amazing super plate. Now, the different styles of plates, I kind of mess around with these throughout the mix once I have kind of the foundation of the drums, bass, and guitar, and then I'll play around with kind of how I like them sounding. And this reverb will tend to be around 1 to 2 seconds, and this really depends on the tempo of the song. So I make sure that all my reverbs and all my delays are in sync with the tempo. Now, fourth effect is I have micro shift. This is at a kind of minimum focus. I like the third style, which is a wider, stronger chorus, and minimum detune and delay right in the middle. So I think this is like the default setting, but on the third style. Now, into delays. This is one of my favorite delays in the world, and I mostly use it for vocals and maybe some guitar solos. This is the Super Tap 6 Waves plugin, and this is basically a stereo delay, and depending on how wacky or how wild I want the delays, I'll actually make sure that delay tempos are not exactly in sync. You know, like this, for example, this is at 104, but I'll maybe put like 102, or, you know, I'll move things around just a tiny bit so that they are not 100% in sync, and then this makes it even wider. But for this song, I left them all as it is. Now the next delay I have is a single kind of mono, the Echo Boy analog processor. I leave it in studio tape. Again, quarter notes, hardly any feedback, and a bit of low cut and high cut, and always in tempo, in sync with the song. Then I have another stereo delay, which I use this more throughout the other instruments and not just the vocals. Again, in sync. Now, the main difference here that you'll see is that I put the groove here. This is where I actually make it a bit wider with all the instruments together. So you see that the left delay has a 5% groove, whilst the right delay has a -5%. And this just makes it slightly wider. It's not playing the same note at the same time on both sides. It's shifting a bit. It's as if like you're not dead center in the room. You're kind of maybe a bit to the side, and it just makes it wider. And finally, this delay here, I tend to only use this on guitar solos, as you'll see here, and sometimes on the main vocals. In this case, I'm actually not using it on my main vocals, but I am using it on the solo, which is an analog delay, a kind of Moog style delay. You'll see that the delay time is at around 0.4. Short delay, 100% in the mix, a bit of drive, and the feedback is around 70%, and with a bit of a high pass up to 250. So this is how I kind of play around with my tempo or kind of ambient style effects, and then for each instrument, I play around with how much I want of each without using too much processing. And most importantly, the reason why I do this is so that if I have my short delay, long delay, short reverb, long reverb, because I'm using the same plugin for all my instruments, they all sound like they're in the same room. It's like they are cohesive. It brings them together instead of having different styles of reverbs and delays in each instrument. Cool. Now that we've seen what I use for my tempo-based effects, let's dive into the drums. Now, I like starting off with a kick. This is kind of standard for rock and metal. I've worked with people who start off with guitars or maybe start with the vocals, but I like starting with a kick so that my low end is already somewhere that I like. And then the snare is just driving the song forward. I know how I want it to sound like. Now, the artists, the Overdrive Luna, they sent me a kick in and a kick out microphone, which is amazing. This gives me a lot of room to play with the low end and the high end. Sometimes the artist will only send me just a single kick mic, and then I'll emulate the kind of low end, the kick out microphone, or have to employ other effects to make sure that that kick is kind of thick, you know? So, but in this case, they sent me a kick in and kick out. I'm going to show you how they sound like. This is the kick in. You notice that there is quite a bit of bleed, which I'm going to fix with the plugins, but for now you get an idea of how they sound like. And the kick out. So you instantly notice that the kick in has a lot more attack, but the kick out kind of complements a bit of that low end into the kick. So normally I work with these two together. I'll find a nice balance between the two of them. And then for this specifically, I wanted to fix the bleed quite soon so that it's not on my way. So you notice that they have very, very similar settings. I believe I started off with the presets on both of these. I use the kick D bleed natural, but then I played around with kind of the range and the release and the D bleed settings. But I believe that the filters are from the preset, and also the detection filters and the dynamic filters are from the preset. And now they sound like this. Much cleaner, a bit easier to work with, and the room mic is going to capture a bit of the more of the kick. So for here, I mainly wanted that kind of low thump and the attack of the kick. Now, in you'll notice as well that all my tracks have the SSL channel on them, the SSL channel strip, and I really, really enjoy them. You'll see that it's in basically almost all of my tracks. But I don't always use it. Most of the time I use it, but not always. And the kick is one example where I actually did not use it. It's here, and I'll leave it here so I can quickly grab the EQ and make some modifications if I want to. But you'll see that it's not used except here on the kick out where I did a tiny bit of a low pass all the way down to 3.2 because I wanted to fix even more that bleed once the gate opened. So here you'll notice that it's a bit cleaner. If we bypass this, you kind of hear a bit of that coming in once the kick is played. So here we have our SSL channels, and finally a very, very tiny bit of EQ on the kick in here. You notice that I only high pass it to 24 hertz just to clean it up a bit. Kind of make sure that low end is not kind of building up throughout the mix. Now with the kick out, and I'm going to silence it here, this is where I did a lot more work. Now here, you'll see that again, around 40 hertz just to clean it up. I cleaned up a bit of this muddy area of 150. Now there was some pingy things that I really did not enjoy. Let's have a listen to what this is doing. You hear like ping, ping, which was irritating me, and this one as well. Just some kind of whistles that I really did not enjoy, and cleaning even more in the kick out the high end of the cymbals that were bleeding in. So this is now making sure that it's a very clean kick. Cool. Now the band had specifically asked me not to add too many samples and make the drum sound as natural as possible. But I did actually need some samples to just fill it out a bit and make sure that the snare and the kick were kind of occupying a nice space and having kind of a really nice sound to it. So for the kick room, you'll notice that there's barely any sample kind of sound into it. I only use this kind of black birch kick that comes with Stephen Slate's, with Slate triggers. And let's have a listen just to how it sounds like. Kind of a direct out, so kind of complementing that out sound. But you'll notice that it's barely there. It's just, honestly, it's just kind of adding something to the kick. And without it, it's very, very subtle. And there was no EQ on it. You notice that I didn't modify anything. Now, once the kick was starting to come together and like the different microphones and samples were sounding good, I wanted now to make sure that they were sounding really good. So here for this first EQ, you notice that I am now kind of deciding, once I was listening to the song, as most rock engineers do, we need to kind of think, where do we want the kick and the bass to occupy? And just this week I released a kind of a short on how I make sure that the bass is not kind of fighting the kick in the low end. So the first thing I decide is which frequencies the kick and the bass are going to occupy. Now for this song, because I know the band, I know the bassist, he's a very melodic bass player. He kind of complements the guitar more than accompany it. I knew that the bass was going to occupy kind of a bit higher end than the kick. So here I decided I'm going to leave the kick occupying the 50 hertz region and the bass at 80 hertz, so the bass above the kick. And then after playing around with the high pass filter, I decided on leaving it at 53 hertz. But this wasn't kind of, again, when I'm mixing, I'm not looking that much at the numbers. It's only on very specific cases that I actually look at the numbers. I do a lot, all my EQing is done kind of through my ears. So I just landed on this 53.6 hertz. Now here I was just cleaning up a lot of that low end all the way up to 130 hertz. So you notice here that it just makes the kick a bit cleaner and less muddy. And then with it on. Now here, I was making it cleaner, but I noticed instantly that I kind of made it a bit thin. So there's a couple of things I did to bring it back and make sure that I'm removing those weird frequencies, but it's kind of coming back to life. First thing, quite a bit of distortion, and whoever uses this plugin knows that this is a very heavy distortion, but you notice the difference, it just comes back to life a bit more. Now with it on, now it's kind of thumpier, thicker. And here, again, I started off with a preset, the big rock kick, just to kind of get an idea of some cool plugins that, you know, people from Slate Trigger use for the kick. But then I started tweaking quite a lot of it. So here you'll see that then there's a compressor. And then a tiny bit of EQ. You'll notice here that not much, but kind of bringing back that low end. Suddenly the low end is back. It's like it's there, but without the kind of annoying frequencies in the low end. And then just to bring it even further, I put this Revival plugin, thickness all the way up to 12. Again, I'm not setting exactly on 12. You'll notice here that when I EQ, look, it's not at anything round. It's just until it sounds good. So the thickness here, once I bring it in, and then suddenly that low end is there. It's back. It's kind of putting the kick in front. Cool. Now, this EQ here, you'll notice that in all of my folders, and actually almost all of my tracks, I have the infinite EQ at the end, which I don't touch until I'm kind of at 80% of the mix. This is when I start tweaking each instrument, sorry, this one here, each instrument according to what the mix is asking of it. So in the end, you notice that here there's this EQ on the kick, which I added probably around 80% of kind of the way of finishing the mix. And here I just removed quite a bit of the 170 hertz and making sure that my kick is still not kind of building up that rumble that is going to then mess up with my mix bus compressor. But here you'll notice that it just cleans up a bit again. And then here you notice that it adds I added a bit of volume later. Cool, so this is my kick, sounding kind of nice for me for the genre of the song. Now moving on to snare. Here again we had a snare top and a snare bottom to kind of have that energy at the top, but then the snap, the kind of high end of the snare at the bottom. Now, the only thing that, and I know that the guys who recorded this, they recorded in their home studio, and it's sounding really cool. And I know that what they were doing, because we actually did a workshop together on how to record drums. And they knew that the snare top and the snare bottom had to be equally distanced from the skins, and that the snare bottom mic had to have its polarity flipped. So I already knew that they were going to give me a kind of in-phase snare. So if we notice here that if we zoom in, the snare top and bottom are in phase. It's kind of a half a millisecond, which is not affecting the song very much, but they are in phase, which is amazing. Now, same thing with the snare top and bottom. I added the gate to it because there was a lot of bleed. Their room, they have an amazing studio, but the room is kind of small, so this kind of increases the chances of mic bleed. Let's have a listen without it, so you kind of hear why I thought it really needed a gate. Oh, I actually grabbed a terrible section for this because it's basically just snares in this section. Let's go to the chorus. You can hear the ride kind of there, and the cymbals when they hit, they kind of, you can hear it. So I added these, which is amazing as well because it's grabbing the ghost notes, so no problem there. Now, the SSL channel, as I mentioned, now for these, I actually did a lot of EQing. You see here that the snare top, I put a filter up all the way up to 100. For both, I added quite a bit of the 8K, and for the SSL channel, especially the E channel, the kind of the black knobs one, I never really touch the 8K knob. I just leave it there. I just like kind of what it does. I don't know the technicalities of it, but it just sounds cool when I boost it in my snares and my vocals and my acoustic guitars. So I barely don't touch the frequency knob. But you see here that I boosted quite a lot of the high frequencies because I felt this snare needed it. And removing quite a bit here of these 700 to 800 hertz, and removing quite a bit of the 500 to 600 hertz. Same thing here, 1.8, I'm removing quite a lot on the snare bottom, and a lot of the 500, the kind of honky part of the snare. And then on the snare top, boosting a bit of the 200 here, around 250 hertz of the snare. No compression here yet, because I do my compression with another plugin. Now, let's have a quick look here now just on the snare top. Here is my upwards compression, which I really like doing on the snare, just so that it kind of pops up when I need it, and the ghost notes are not being lost too much in the mix. That's why I really enjoy kind of upwards compression. You'll see here that the R comp, which is very much used, from what I've seen a lot of people use this mainly on vocals. Either they use R Vox or R comp, but I use my R comp on my snare. So here, just upwards compression. Let's bypass it. It just brings it a bit more energy to it. Now, before my snare bottom hits my R comp, which is basically the same setting, you'll see here that the attack is the same. The snare bottom has a bit longer release and a kind of lower ratio. Now, before the snare bottom hits it, I actually use my decapitator on my snare bottom. Now, this is a kind of quite heavy distortion. I'm using a Neve style distortion here, which I wanted a kind of a bit of a darker tone. I even brought the knob a bit down towards dark. Quite a bit of low cut here, 130 hertz, with the thump knob on, and 10 maximum drive, and the mix at around 70% more or less. This is kind of where I liked it sounding. Let's have a listen to just the decapitator. So without the decapitator, and with. So now it's bringing the snare sound, the actual snares on the bottom, kind of a bit, bringing life to it. And then going to my R comp, just bringing it up when it hits. And then finally some EQ here, which actually has nothing on it. As I mentioned, this is used to fix things if I need to, but I didn't need to fix anything. Cool. Now, what did I use for room? So for the snares, there's a bit more room sound to it. You'll notice here that there's quite a lot of samples. I use this kind of never snare, a bit more kind of smack that I needed, and a bit of the room mic of that same snare. And then also this other snare here. Again, just to add a bit more kind of energy to the snare, but it's quite low volume. I'll kind of bring it in and out just to show you the difference. Now with it on, kind of bring a bit more energy here. And then once I have these 3 snares here, first it goes into my EQ. Now, I wanted it a bit darker even than it was. I think it was a bit too bright for me, so this is why I kind of brought down everything above 3K and removing the annoying 4 to 450 hertz, which I don't know, I really hate on snares, and high passing it all the way up to 60 hertz just to kind of get rid of that rumble. Let me show you what this is doing here. This kind of block. I hate that sound. So I tend to remove it in all my snares. Now, a bit of distortion, not as much as a kick, but just kind of bringing the snare to life. And finally, same thing here as I did with the kick. I grabbed the big snare preset, but then played around with it until I liked what I was hearing. So a bit of compression. Here, about 2 to 3 dB. And then a bit more thickness to it. Cool. Now, next thing I do with my snares, especially when I'm going to like the rock metal scene, is I love adding the LX480 digital delay into my snare. I really like what it does. I'm going to show you what it sounds like, just so you have a listen to what it's doing. I'm going to completely mute this, but you're going to hear what the delay is doing. It's really cool. I like that sound. Kind of, it grabs a bit of that 80s style drum sound. I don't know, but making it a bit more modern. I just really like what this does. So yeah, this is how my snare sounds like. Cool. Now, I just realized some of my reverbs and delays were on, but that's fine. I didn't add that much reverb and delay. But this is the snare without any reverb or delay, except for the digital delay. And my kick without any reverb or delay. Cool. Now, toms, I skip them. I only go to toms once I have all my overheads and room sound going on, because the toms, even though they were mic'd closely, they bleed a lot into the snare, they bleed a lot into the overheads, the room. So I try to make sure that everything is sounding really cool, and then I bring in the toms to fit the rest of the drum parts. So let's kind of mute this for now. Now, overheads. Once I have the kick and the snare playing nicely together, kind of where I like, I bring in my overheads. Sometimes I will say this. Sometimes I have actually skipped the overheads as well and gone straight to room mics. If the room mics were like amazingly well recorded, if we've got like room stereo, room mono, they sound amazing, because then they are giving life to the drums, and then the overheads are just giving clarity to the drums. But in this case, because there was only one mono room mic, I first jumped into the overheads, and then later I go into the room mic. So let's have a listen to what the overheads are doing. I'm going to mute everything here. Switch off as well my my reverbs. And cool, let's have a listen. So first things first, my overheads, on my SSL channel, I only put a high pass filter, didn't touch anything else. You'll notice that there's nothing here, but then I EQ'd it quite a bit, removing some of the kind of honkiness and kind of horrible sounding stuff, and then just adding a bit more clarity to it in the high end. So let's have a listen to it without any EQ, but then bring it in. And then with EQ. So you notice here that I'm removing a bit of the snare sound here. Here I'm removing a bit more of the snare because there's quite a bit of that 500 sound that I hate from the snare, and it's bleeding a bit into the overheads. And then here I'm around the 1K, I'm just clearing out the overheads because I know that the 1K is going to fight with the guitars. So by removing that 1K from the overheads, I'm giving more room for my guitars to work in the future. And then obviously more clarity in the high end. Moving on to hi-hats. So by the way, I work drummer perspective, even though the artist recorded as audience perspective. In the end, I used drummer's perspective, which I prefer, and they said do what you need to do, and that's why I panned it like this. This is literally a personal preference. If you're working with metal, I guarantee you that people are going to find it weird if you don't mix in drummer's perspective. But if you're working in any other genre, it is literally personal preference. If you want to make the listener feel like they are playing with a band, drummer perspective. If you want to feel like the listener is watching the band, audience perspective. But yeah, because this was kind of rock, I just chose to do drummer's perspective. Cool. Hi-hat. What do we have here? A bit of EQ on the hi-hat. Let me switch everything off and you hear what it's doing after. Okay. Then I added a bit of the boosted the high end, cleaned up a bit of that rumble, removed quite a bit of the 1.3K, removed quite a bit of the 700-800 hertz, and we get this. Kind of a bit more clarity to my hi-hat. And with EQ, I did quite a lot here because I wasn't really liking the hi-hat sound that I had. So you hear that there's this kind of pingy sound that I'm going to actually mute everything and then bring it slowly because there's quite a lot happening here. Now, first of all, I knew I wanted it sounding a bit brighter so that it accompanies the overheads. It's kind of not sounding weird. So I brought in the high end. Bit more clarity. Now, one thing that really popped out for me was this frequency here. Was hating it, so really cut it out, and then I cut it even further probably later on. Same frequency. And then clearing out a bit more stuff here in the low mids. And this was my hi-hat. And then we have my ride. Let me choose another section here. The chorus, I believe, has... There we go. So here, you already hear that it's kind of like really muffled. So clearing a bit of the high end because I want the overheads to occupy that space, but clearing also the low end, boosting the highs, cutting the kind of mids, 1.3 again, 750 hertz. Already makes it sound nicer. Now here, this is where I did some kind of stronger EQ. You're going to hear the difference. Here's kind of boxy, muddy. Now it's clearer. Now, once I had all of my overheads, hi-hat, and ride, I kind of balanced it so that it sounded cohesive. This is when we jump into kind of mixing them together alongside the rest. This is what I tend to do. Now I kind of bring them together. Now, I don't always do this, but for this, because there's quite a bit of snare bleed into the overhead mics, I added a compressor with the snare sidechain to it. This way, when the snare hits, there aren't going to be too many phase issues because it's going to bring down that snare from the overheads, which is reaching the overhead mics with a few milliseconds of delay. So this way it reduces my phase issues and also controls my snare dynamic. So you notice here there's not much, about 1 dB gain reduction. Maybe sometimes it jumps to -3, but mostly 2 dB. Now, here, my overheads, I'm removing a bit more of that 800 and a bit more of the 2.3 and giving it even more room, more space to my kick and my snare here. Now, soothe, this is kind of very typical. However, you'll notice that my mix is not 100%, around 80%, but this is just clearing out my cymbals. They're not that harsh. Kind of that ride is not kind of irritating your ears. And finally, this came at a later time. Sometimes they will look kind of weird, but you know, for me, it made sense what I was doing when I was mixing this. But here we have a bit more EQ. Now, here, this one is a dynamic EQ. It was mostly when the ride was playing. I wanted to just control that hit. Notice how when the ride hits, it ducks. There's kind of many other things going on here. You know, bringing down that 460 hertz, 500, 650, 2K, and a bit of the 5K. And then ducking everything above, everything above 2K when the ride hits. Cool, now this is my overheads, my cymbals with the kick and snare. Then I will work with my room. Now my room I didn't want it to do that much. You'll notice here that there's not much EQ because I knew I actually wanted to do multiband compression and really smash the hell out of it, just to make it kind of even throughout all the frequency spectrum. It sounds weird, but for me it sounded cool. So let's have a listen. This is off and then on. So my low end is not going to be accumulating that much. It's ducking everything below, I believe, 80 hertz. It's making sure that, again, those ride and cymbal hits are not peaking. So that's why you see that it kind of keeps ducking this area here. And my snare and everything else is kind of in the 1.5K, which is where it's going to be fighting the guitars. And then with my EQ, there's nothing. Nothing I needed here. Now, once I have all of this done, this is when I switch on my bus compressor. Before I go to toms, again, my toms are my last thing, because once my compressor starts hitting everything, I want to make sure that the toms are not going to be whacking that compressor and making everything sound weird. So first I compress my drums, then I go onto toms, and then finally into parallel compression. So here, my compressor, kind of typical SSL bus compressor. Oops, let me bring everything here. Just touching it. Maybe 1-2 dB gain reduction. Very smooth. Here you'll see there's kind of a bit of a fast, kind of mid-attack, 1 millisecond. Auto release. Here, 20 ratio, so that I'm really compressing only when the kick and the snare hit. And EQ, this I came at a later stage just to reduce a bit more of that low end, 50 hertz. And then now we go into our toms. Now, let's find a section with toms. Yeah. Cool. Let's go here. Cool. Let's switch some of this off. Right, toms. What did I do with them? First, same thing, gates. let's have a listen without them and you understand why. Everything was coming in. So that's why the range is like 100. Now with the gate. Now, these toms were sounding a bit like plasticky. So here I didn't do much with my SSL because I really wanted to find all the frequencies I was looking for. So I came in with my infinite EQ, and they're identical except for these specific frequencies. So they have the same shape, as you can see, but then I moved around the cuts. So what they have here is I cut out everything below 80 hertz and 60 hertz. So rack tom, floor tom. So rack tom, everything below 80 I don't want, and floor tom, everything below 60 I don't want. Boosting the low end so that they still have that energy. You see here 220 and 280. Boosting the hits at around 3 to 4K. This is kind of where the sticks hit the toms. And then cleaning up these regions. And I'll play this section here so you can hear what these are doing. So here, this is what they sound like. It's kind of wok. This is like the plasticky, horrible sound that we don't like. This is just cleaning it up. So this kind of deep sounding toms that I like, the band liked. And then a bit of more EQ, kind of joined up EQ and compressor. Kind of really nice sounding. Sometimes I will actually bring a clipper in so that the toms are really energetic, but this song didn't actually need that much compressor or clipping or anything like that, so I didn't bring it in. Cool. And then, so this is kind of how they are sounding like throughout the whole drums. Now, parallel compression. I use Devil Lock by Soundtoys. So here are my settings: 2 crush, 1 crunch, fast, 4 darkness. This one I will tend to move around in the song depending on the mix. The crush, crunch, and release settings, I never touch them in any mix. This is kind of the numbers that I've found that I like. Now the darkness, this is what sometimes I'll play around with this throughout the mix to make sure that my parallel compressor is kind of nicely EQ'd. And here this came in much later, but I really needed to EQ a lot of this parallel compression. Very important, please EQ your parallel compression. Otherwise, you're going to be bringing a lot of bad frequencies into the kind of... Because the idea of the parallel compression is bringing your drums to life, is bringing them together, making them sound like they're in this big room, really punchy, really kind of cool. But because the parallel compression brings up a lot of the volume of the drums, and you're sending in all these different parts again, they're going to start accumulating with each other, and you really need to make sure that these are kind of in a nice place. So let's have a listen to parallel compression. Because it's not that strong, you won't hear much of a difference of the EQ, but I'll show you the difference anyway. This is without the EQ. Very, very, very subtle parallel compression. So here, kick, sending the kick at a good volume, nice volume. Snare, not so much. Toms, not so much. Overheads, even less. And then room, this is, again, not so much. So I'm mostly sending my kick to my parallel compressor. Once we have all of this, let's have a look at what my compressor is doing, especially with the toms. Let me put like a wider section here so we can have a listen. Have a different section here. Cool. And then I start adding my reverbs and delays. So for all instruments, I use my first reverb, the kind of 400 millisecond medium reverb. So not much of it. This is just to bring all the instruments together. You see that except for the bass, everything else has the first reverb on. And it's just a tiny bit, except for the main vocal, because it has a lot of other reverbs, and you kind of want the vocalist to be at the front of the stage or in front of you, so that you don't want that much reverb. But I'm playing around with other types of reverbs with the vocals. But for everything else, the instruments, a bit of that medium reverb, and a bit of the long reverb, the super plate. And to make sure that my kick is not accumulating too much low end, I don't want my kick being delayed. So my kick has no delay on it. That's why I added my delays on the everything else. So my snare, this is the mod delay, the stereo delay. So let's have a listen with all these delays on. And these are my drums. At this stage, I will then go on to bass and guitars. In this case, there's also some acoustic guitars, but I would jump straight to my rhythm guitars and my acoustic guitar and pianos or synths or whatever you have. Once I have the foundation of the harmonies and all the instruments, not the vocals, but all the instruments, then I would start turning on my mix bus. For this mix bus, one important thing here again, just cleaning up that low end. This, because we're talking about drums, this is really important. My mix bus is going to be reacting to the drums quite a lot. This is one of the very few cases where I actually look at the numbers. I'm actually looking at what the needle is doing. Obviously, when you over compress something, you can really notice it. When you under compress it, you can notice it. But the sweet spot for me, when I'm in my mix bus, especially when I have the drums, the bass, the guitars, this is kind of rule of thumb, but I will obviously change some of the settings. But this is kind of how I start off my mix bus compression. With these settings, I'm trying to reach a 3 dB gain with my snare and a 1 dB gain reduction with my kick, more or less. This is not exact science, but more or less this. So you can see that it's kind of in that region. And then with this, I'm able to control quite a lot of the dynamics without overcompressing, but also without undercompressing. And then I'll play around maybe with a bit of the release and the high pass filter. So cool, this is how I mix my drums. This is very much very common throughout all my mixes. Very straightforward. I don't think there's that much going on, but I hope you got some cool insights out of this. So definitely check them out, Overdrive Luna. Check them out on Instagram, on YouTube. Give them a like, give them a follow. Check out their music. And for more insights and more tips and more run-throughs on rock and metal mixing, give us a like on this video. Follow the channel. Check me out on Instagram as well and TikTok, Caipora Studio. And there you're going to find a lot of cool tips and tricks when you're producing, but also if you're a musician, on how to record yourself better and how to better communicate with your mixing engineer. Right, have a good day and good mixing.